What would you do if your new in-laws demanded you sleep on the couch, separating you from your wife, just days into your first visit? In today's story, the protagonist's choice is a masterclass in how to handle it. My wife, Sarah, and I tied the knot last summer. Her family lived clear across the country, so I hadn't actually visited them at their home until now. I'd met them a few times before at various events, and we'd always gotten along well enough. They extended an invitation for us to come stay with them for a few days, and we gladly accepted. We flew in yesterday, and the day started off perfectly. Sarah's dad, Robert, and I settled in to watch some football, sharing easy conversation and a few laughs. Meanwhile, Sarah reconnected with her mom, Eleanor, and her sisters, Emily and Jessica, catching up on all the news. Afterwards, we all enjoyed a really nice dinner together, the atmosphere warm and welcoming. But as the evening wound down, things took an unexpected turn. It became glaringly clear that they had no intention of allowing me to share a bed with my own wife while in their home. They fully expected me to sleep on the couch. Honestly, I thought they were pulling my leg at first, a misguided attempt at humor, but their faces remained serious, and they insisted that we sleep separately. I immediately had a problem with the sheer implication of it, the idea that I, a married man, shouldn't be permitted to sleep next to my wife. It felt like a blatant disrespect to our marriage. Beyond that, I suffer from a bad back, and a quick glance at their living room sofa confirmed my fears. It did not look the least bit comfortable. It wasn't as if they had a guest room. This was their only alternative. We went back and forth for a bit, a tense argument unfolding in what had been such a pleasant evening. Eventually, I decided I'd had enough. I announced I was leaving and would book myself a hotel. I told Sarah she didn't have to come with me, that the choice was hers, and she decided to stay. I told her I'd be back the next day. I drove off to a Marriott about 10 minutes away, the car ride a blur of simmering frustration. I checked in, got to my room, and thankfully, managed to get a good night's sleep, doing my best to push the entire bizarre situation out of my mind. The next morning, I called Sarah, asking when would be a good time for me to come back to the house. Her voice was hesitant as she relayed her parents' demand. They wanted me to apologize for leaving the way I did. I sighed, running a hand through my hair. I told her that I was willing to offer an apology to keep the peace, but only if they acknowledged that their insistence on us sleeping separately was inappropriate. It was a simple request for mutual respect. She said she'd talk to them and call me back. About 10 minutes later, my phone rang again. It was Sarah, and her tone had shifted, a mix of frustration and resignation. Not only would Robert and Eleanor not apologize, but they were now insisting that I had to come back and sleep on the couch for the remainder of our visit. If I didn't agree to their terms, I wasn't welcome back in their house at all. At this point, I was absolutely livid. The audacity was staggering. I told her there was absolutely no chance I would agree to such a ridiculous demand, and that I was no longer willing to offer any sort of apology. My phone then started buzzing with messages from Sarah's sisters, Emily and Jessica. They were bothering me, saying, this is just the way their parents are, and that Sarah was incredibly upset. They urged me to just give in and stay on the couch for the rest of the trip, before this spiraled into a full-blown family feud. From my perspective, their opinions held no sway with me. I was perfectly willing to treat the rest of this trip as a solo vacation. I'd go sightseeing, explore the area, and simply meet Sarah back at the airport at the end of the week. It was their house, their rules, and their rules were, in my opinion, utterly stupid. Rather than engaging in a pointless battle, I had set a clear and valid boundary, and they had chosen to take offense to it. As one commenter astutely pointed out, their demand for me to sleep on the couch was clearly a power play. My decision to stay in a hotel stripped them of that power, and they simply couldn't handle it. A few hours later, I decided to take the advice I saw online and asked Sarah and her sisters to meet me for dinner, away from their parents. The dinner was, to say the least, illuminating. Once we were seated, I gently but firmly pressed them on what had happened. I looked at Sarah and asked if she had known Robert was going to demand we sleep separately. She shook her head, her expression a mix of bewilderment and shame. She said she was just as surprised by it, explaining that she'd expect such a demand if I were still just her boyfriend, but we were married now. Then, I asked all of them if they genuinely thought it was okay for their parents to act the way they did. They admitted it wasn't right. but quickly added that they knew their father and it was always best to just let things like this go. This led to a somewhat uncomfortable, but necessary, conversation. They began to describe how controlling Robert could be, how easily he angered when he didn't get his way, and how he was already throwing a fit over me disrespecting him by leaving. The reason they had all been so desperate for me to come back and apologize was simple: he would find a way to make all of their lives miserable for the rest of the week if I didn't. I looked at Sarah, my disappointment palpable. I told her I was truly let down that she wouldn't side with her own husband when I was clearly in the right. She went quiet, her gaze dropping to her lap. Then, I posed another question: did they truly believe this was about house rules? Or did it seem more like Robert was just trying to assert his dominance and show me who was in charge? All three of them nodded in unison. They agreed. This revealed Robert's greatest fatal flaw, his need for absolute control, which ultimately sealed his fate. Up to this point, I felt I had done everything in my power not to escalate the situation. But sitting there, seeing how truly afraid they all were of Robert's reactions, something shifted within me. I knew I needed to push back. Not just for myself, but for Sarah and her sisters too. I knew Sarah's main reason for this trip was to spend time with her sisters, whom she rarely got to see. So, I laid out my plan. I told them I was going to move to a hotel by the beach, about an hour away in San Diego, for the rest of the week. Then, I offered to book a second room for them if they wanted to all join me. They rarely got to go on trips like this, and I figured the idea of a free vacation, away from their parents' controlling influence, would be enticing. They knew, deep down, that Robert would probably freak out when he discovered they had left. But I think in that moment, they finally realized that the situation had escalated too far, and they decided to come with me and deal with the fallout later. So, that's where things stand now. I'm about to check out of my current hotel and hit the road for San Diego. Sarah and her sisters are following in a separate car after Robert and Eleanor leave for work. I fully expect Robert to throw a complete conniption fit when he finds out they've left without telling him. But at this point, I truly don't care. I genuinely tried to be the bigger person at every turn, but he pushed this entire situation way too far. My dignity was not up for discussion or negotiation. If this meant a family feud without end, then so be it. The core lesson here is about setting boundaries and standing firm against disrespect, even when it comes from family. What would you have done in this situation?